one thought I had about this as I was trying to process this movie, right? So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of characters, and that's already way cut down from what the novel apparently does. I got a very brief glimpse of the novel, and it's just much more complex than this. And I think there have been dozens of attempts to adapt this, and I don't know how good those are. But I had a little bit of a feeling like, just the synopsis of the novel, that this was kind of a Game of Thrones situation where you have all of these subplots and characters that, even if they seem insignificant, kind of all hang together and everything influences everything else. And so you have either, like, if you can't adapt the whole thing because it's too complex, but you also can't cut things because then it stops making sense. And pretty much every complaint I found from a book fan is that cutting this small character removes the emotional resonance from the plot of this other small character, and the connotation of this event is completely different because of that. And that just reminded me of A Song of Ice and Fire discussions about Game of Thrones, where, like, a lot of things, if you cut small things in season 2, essentially break season 5, that sort of thing, because everything is so interconnected. And it just seems to be a similar situation. Like, one of my pet theories for why Game of Thrones failed is that they could have, like, they didn't fully commit to which subplot to adapt, right? So in Game of Thrones, you cannot adapt the entire thing as written, but you can tell a story about the War of the Five Kings, right? But then you have to be very careful about what you cut, and you have to think the ramifications of each cut through. And if you don't do that, then you get things like Cersei drinking wine on a balcony for 2 seasons and stuff like that, right? Like, stuff that simply doesn't make sense, but you can see kind of the seams where they cut out a plot, right? And I have a feeling that this is similar. Not having read the novel, I can only speculate, but it seems a bit like you cannot adapt the story in its entirety because it's so complex. But you can tell a story about this guy who wants to engineer, like, revenge on these 3 people, and he tailors it to their vices. And then for some of them it works, and for some he has to improvise, right? But then it seems like they didn't fully commit to boiling down the story to that, right? Because there's a lot of other stuff that kind of happens, like this whole thing about Ade's background as the daughter of this Albanian vassal to the Ottomans and stuff like that. Like, it keeps showing up, and I think there's entire subplots in the books where that is relevant, but it's not in the movie. But she still has to have that background, and so she still has to mention it and has to explain it to the audience. And so we're spending time on something that doesn't matter really, other than that she's foreign. That seems to be the only way in which this matters, right? I don't know. It's like that's kind of the impression I got, is that they kind of didn't fully think through what they had to cut and what to keep if they wanted to tell the streamlined version of the story, because that seems to be the mission here. That it's like you take this massive story and this massive book, and then you try to tell that story in one movie, but you can't do the whole thing. You can only tell part of it.
It seems like they took out the parts which they thought was going to be the most emotionally provoking scenes out of the audience. I'm not saying the other stuff which they left out wasn't going to be that, but it just seems like they tried to simplify and say, okay, what's going to be easiest to do, what's going to, like, connect well, and what's going to be, you know, what are the audience going to connect with the most.